Have you ever had someone you trusted deeply, someone you called a friend, and they betrayed you in a way you never imagined? This is the story of a scam that almost destroyed my life. My partner stole everything we had built together and left, me with nothing, but he forgot one crucial detail. Sometimes, what seems like the end is just the beginning of a great transformation. If you have ever been through something like this, or are facing a difficult situation, I want you to stay here, because this story may be the inspiration you need to take the next step in your life. Subscribe to the channel and come see how, even in the darkest situations, we can find strength, faith, and the power to start over. It all started 7 years ago, when Ricardo, my best friend since we were teenagers, and I decided to open a small carpentry shop together. He had the talent with his hands. I had the talent with numbers. It was an old dream that was finally taking shape, and we put everything we had into it: savings, time, hope, and faith. Our friendship was so solid that we didn't even think about contracts or clauses. All it took was a handshake and the trust of someone who had been through ups and downs together. I remember when we first opened our doors. The smell of new wood, the dust in the air, the tired but purposeful smiles. The first orders were timid, but each piece of furniture delivered was a victory. We worked late, drank coffee from plastic cups, laughed at our own mistakes, and dreamed of the day when it would all become big. And in a way, it did. But not every seed grows as we imagine. Little by little, I began to notice small changes. Meetings he missed, decisions he made alone, values that didn't match. I tried to justify it. He must be tired. Maybe I'm exaggerating. After all, who wants to believe that betrayal can come from the one we trust most? But time reveals what the eyes try to hide. And there, in the silence of the details, something was already falling apart. And I still didn't know that this dream for two would soon become my worst nightmare. Ricardo's absences began to become more frequent. He always had a ready excuse: meetings with suppliers, personal problems, or even, "I'm working things out for our own good." At first, I accepted it. After all, we were partners, friends, brothers in the journey. But over time, the delays turned into neglect, and the empty promises began to hang in the air like a dark cloud about to collapse. I began to notice that some clients were being served by him without my knowledge. Money that came in and wasn't recorded. When I questioned it, he always said he would write it down later, that it was just an advance. That began to erode my peace. The carpentry shop, which used to be my pride, began to become a place of uncertainty and tension. And I, trying to keep everything together, ended up keeping quiet for fear of confronting the truth. One day a client called me asking about a payment he had made, a large amount. I had no idea what he was talking about. I went to the office, looked for the records, and nothing. My heart froze. I confronted Ricardo, and he, with that old smile, tried to trick me. But there, in that awkward conversation, I felt something was deeply wrong. The trust that had always been our foundation was crumbling, and when the foundation breaks, everything around it starts to shake. What I didn't know was that the hole was much deeper than I imagined. I woke up on a normal Monday, but something in the air already seemed strange. The carpentry shop was empty. No sign of Ricardo. I called him several times, but there was no answer. I went into the office and noticed that the drawer where we kept documents was open, empty. Invoices, contracts, even the spreadsheet of accounts that we kept together were gone. I felt the ground slipping away from under my feet. It was like being in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. I ran to the bank to check the company's account, and that's when the shock came. The balance, which should have been over 30,000 rays, was zero. Sequential withdrawals had been made over the last few days, all signed by him. I stood, staring at the ATM screen, my hands shaking and a bitter taste in my mouth. It was as if a part of me had been forcibly ripped away. I had been robbed by my best friend. I went back to the warehouse and sat on the workshop floor, surrounded by the smell of wood, the silence, and a pain I couldn't explain. It was more than the money, more than the documents or the lost job. It was the betrayal. The wound that hurts the most is not the one that bleeds on the outside, but the one that cuts the soul from the inside. And that day, I bled in silence. I tried to talk to his family, mutual friends, but no one knew anything, or they pretended not to know. He disappeared. He disappeared like smoke in the wind, leaving me alone with debts, commitments, and a business on the verge of collapse. And yet, the worst was yet to come. In the following days, I lived in a state of denial. That huge void in my chest seemed to be the only thing left. I couldn't believe he had done that my business partner and longtime friend had betrayed me so cruelly. But reality, that one thing, left no room for illusions. Every call I made, every person I asked for help, only gave me more evidence that Ricardo had planned everything. The scam had been meticulously orchestrated. But why? Little by little, I began to put the pieces together. I discovered that he had created bank accounts in the company's name, moved all the money without my knowledge, and, worst of all, sold the carpentry equipment and materials without leaving a trace. It was as if, deep down, he had prepared to leave me with nothing, to disappear in a way that I would never be able to trace. Hatred was starting to grow inside me, a blind rage that consumed me. But at the same time, the pain of betrayal and the fear of what would become of my life without that business. Meanwhile, despair took over my mind. I, who had always believed in honesty and the value of friendship, was seeing everything we had built crumble before my eyes. The debts began to pile up, and I didn't know how I was going to pay the rent for that place. I remember spending sleepless nights, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand where it all went wrong. What was missing? Why did he do this? But something inside me said, it's not the end. Deep down, there was still a flame of hope, a voice that whispered that, no matter how deep the fall, I could get back up. I just needed to find the strength to move forward. And then, something unexpected happened. One night, with no hope of finding a way out, a call changed everything. It was from an unknown number. I answered the phone with a heavy heart, expecting yet another warning about a debt, yet another charge. But to my surprise, it was one of our old clients. He wanted to know if I was okay because he had noticed some changes in the service, and he asked me a question that, at first glance, seemed insignificant, but that would soon turn out to be the key to everything. Did you know that Ricardo was in trouble with the law? I was silent for a few seconds, not understanding what he meant. The client, noticing my surprise, said that when he visited his store, he realized that Ricardo had been involved in a series of legal issues before we met. He had debts and even an outstanding conviction for fraud. That came as a shock to me, a revelation that seemed surreal. How had I not known anything? How had I not noticed the signs? That client, in an unexpected act of kindness, referred me to the lawyer who was handling Ricardo's case. And when I met with the lawyer, the truth finally began to unfold. What I didn't know was that Ricardo had already tried to scam other businesses before. And the most shocking thing was that he had a huge debt, and if the carpentry shop hadn't been opened, he would have been arrested much earlier. I was the latest victim of his web of deceit. This made me realize that I was not alone in this story. Other people had also been harmed. Other companies had been destroyed by the same lie he used to deceive me. And now, more than ever, I knew that I needed to act. But not with anger, but with intelligence. Because unlike him, I still had something that he could never take from me. My dignity. It was there, in that moment of revelation, that something inside me changed. I would not be a victim forever. I would take control of my life back. And with that, I began to plan what would come next. With the weight of the truth on my shoulders, I knew that I had two options. Let myself be consumed by anger and despair, or use all that pain as fuel to rebuild my life. I chose the second. I was not going to let the betrayal and the fall of everything we had built be the end of my story. He would not be the one to define my destiny. So I decided to seek justice. I hired a lawyer specialized in fraud and began to gather evidence against Ricardo. I went after the documents, talked to clients and suppliers, and even found some of his former business partners who were willing to help me, as they had also been deceived. With each step, more and more evidence emerged, and my trust in justice began to grow stronger. But it wasn't just the search for justice that drove me. It was the desire to get back on my feet, to show myself that nothing, not even the greatest betrayal, could take away what I had most valuable, my inner strength. I began to recover my self-esteem and work in my carpentry shop with a new outlook, no longer as the victim of work. Once again became a space of purpose, where I reconnected with the essence of what really mattered: honesty, trust, and the ability to transform adversity into learning. I knew that no matter how great the financial loss was, I still had something that Ricardo would never have: the ability to start over with my head held high and my soul at peace. It was only a matter of time until the pieces fell into place and I knew how to take the next step. I was stronger, more focused, and most importantly, I was ready for the turnaround that was coming. As I worked through the evidence and emotionally rebuilt myself, I began to realize that there was something much bigger at stake than simply recovering what had been lost. I was on a journey of transformation, something that was pushing me to be more than the simple man I had been. It was as if, in that process, I was being reborn. And at the same time, the truth began to shine, like a strong light capable of illuminating even the darkest corners. So I decided to do something that seemed impossible to me at first. I would face Ricardo, not with anger or blind revenge, but with the truth. He, who thought he had left me at rock bottom, did not know that there was an invisible force pushing me to the top. I was ready to put him against the wall, and more importantly, I was ready to reclaim my life and my purpose, regardless of everything he had tried to take from me. I met Ricardo weeks later in a small cafe, where he seemed completely oblivious to what was approaching. He tried to smile, but his suspicious look betrayed his attempt at disguise. I sat down in front of him and calmly began to talk. I told him about what he had done, about the lies he had spread, and about what his betrayal had caused in my life. He tried to defend himself, tried to deny it, but deep down he knew that the proof was there. The biggest surprise was when he began to lose his composure. He had not expected to be challenged in this way. Anger, panic, guilt, everything came to the surface. But the most important thing was that I was calm. He could try to change the situation, but the truth was on my side, and nothing could change that. I did not need to lower myself to his level, nor lose myself in revenge. I wanted something greater. The peace of knowing that, even though he had stolen my money and left me with nothing, he could never steal my dignity or the power to get back on my feet. I left that meeting with an indescribable feeling of freedom. Ricardo was lost, but I had finally found my way back to myself. After the confrontation with Ricardo, the feeling of relief was almost immediate. Not because I had defeated him, but because I had defeated myself. I realized, at that moment, that the true achievement was not in tearing down the other person, but in lifting myself up completely. I had not only overcome the betrayal, but also discovered strengths within myself that I never knew I had. The process of rebuilding the carpentry shop was long, longer than I imagined. The debts were still there. The distrust still hung over my shoulders, but I no longer felt the weight of despair. I began to attract people who shared the same values as me: honesty, integrity, purpose. Little by little, I regained clients, partners, and even over time, the trust of people who once saw me as a victim. The carpentry shop was reborn, stronger, more solid, with a new focus, helping other people start over, just like me. Little by little, the pain of betrayal became a life lesson. I learned to see failures as opportunities for growth and to recognize that no matter how deep the pain is, it has no power to define who we are. The internal transformation was more significant than any financial recovery. I became someone wiser, more centered, more compassionate, with others and with myself. And most importantly, I learned to forgive. Forgiving myself for having allowed myself to be deceived. And forgiving Ricardo, not because he deserved it, but because by doing so, I finally freed myself from the anger that consumed him. He didn't deserve my anger, and I wasn't going to carry it anymore. It was there, in that moment of inner peace, that I realized that true victory is not over others, but about our own ability to overcome adversity with dignity and faith. Over time, carpentry became more than a business. It became a symbol of my rebirth. Every piece of wood I cut, every piece of furniture I molded, seemed to carry with it my story of overcoming, forgiveness, and a new beginning. I had rebuilt more than just my financial life. I had regained my peace, my confidence, and my purpose. Success was no longer in profit, but in the journey of transformation that I lived every day. And looking back, I realized that what Ricardo tried to take from me, the trust, the business, the money, he could never take from me. He took from me what was outside of me, but he didn't rob me of the essence of who I am. I became stronger, more resilient, and now more prepared for the challenges that life would still bring me. Because in the end, what really matters is not what we lose, but what we learned along the way. Today, the carpentry shop is thriving, and I continue with the same commitment I've always had, to deliver not only products, but also purpose. I'm grateful for every lesson that life has taught me, for every mistake I've made, and for every victory achieved with faith and determination. Ricardo, with all his evil, helped me become a better version of myself. And for that, I no longer need to hate him. I just need to be grateful, because without him, I might never have discovered the true power of transformation. Starting over is not a straight line. It is full of curves, challenges, and moments of doubt. But when we are willing to follow with faith, overcoming becomes possible, and true freedom is found on the path we choose to follow. At the end of this journey, what really remained was the lesson that, no matter how much betrayal and pain make us want to give up, true strength lies in how we get up and transform ourselves. Ricardo tried to knock me down, but I got back up, stronger than ever. Life, like carpentry, is an art of building something new, even with the broken pieces. Have you ever experienced something like this? Have you ever had to face a betrayal that seemed impossible to overcome? What would you do if you were in my place? I want to know your opinion in the comments. If this story touched your heart, like it, share it with someone who needs to hear this message, and subscribe to the channel. Remember, true strength lies in believing that, even in the midst of the storm, we can find our purpose and get back up.